Day 4, cross-examination of Cassie Ventura, a courtroom showdown. The cross-examination begins. Sean Diddy Combs' defense team launched their much-anticipated cross-examination of Cassie Ventura on Thursday morning, day 4 of the explosive federal trial. Ventura, 38 years old and visibly 8 months pregnant, took the stand dressed in a light-colored blouse and blazer, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. As she settled into the witness chair, a hush fell over the packed Manhattan courtroom. Combs, sitting at the defense table in a cream sweater, watched with an unreadable expression, legs crossed casually and hands folded. Defense attorney Ana Maria Estevao stepped forward calmly. Estevao's tone was measured, almost gentle, as she began an approach clearly calculated not to appear aggressive toward the pregnant witness. In a steady voice, Estevao had Cassie acknowledge some fundamental truths about the 11 years she spent involved with Combs. "You were in love with him for 11 years and you took care of him, correct?" Estevao asked, setting the stage. Cassie answered quietly in the affirmative. Yes, she had loved Combs. Yes, she had devoted herself to him. Estevao nodded, then pressed a step further. "You kept coming back to him for 11 years, she continued. "You put up with all that because you thought he truly loved you too." Cassie hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickered toward the jury as if considering how to phrase her response. "Not every time," she replied softly. A few jurors leaned forward, eager to catch every word from the soft-spoken witness. From the outset, the defense's strategy was clear and methodical. Their narrative was that Ventura had been an active participant in a turbulent but consensual relationship, not a victim of a criminal sex trafficking enterprise. Over the next several hours, Estevao set out to chip away at the prosecution's portrayal of Combs as a manipulative predator. Instead, through careful questions and exhibits, she painted a picture of a romance marked by mutual passion, jealousy, and drug-fueled excess, toxic and volatile perhaps, but voluntary on both sides. It was, the defense contended, a dysfunctional love story rather than a crime. Ventura braced herself as Estevao's questioning began to probe the early years of their relationship. The attorney produced a stack of printed emails and text messages, some more than a decade old, and one by one, these exhibits were displayed on monitors for the jury. In one of the first messages shown, dated 2007, when Ventura was just 21, her own words flashed on the screen in bold letters. Estevao invited her to read it aloud. Cassie's voice barely trembled as she complied. "We only had 1 week together and it's been the best and worst," she read, describing the whirlwind of falling for Combs. "I've never felt so safe and loved. You're one of the sweetest, most sincere people. Who knew I'd fall so fast?" As those youthful, starry-eyed words hung in the air, Cassie let out a nervous little laugh, a brief, incongruous giggle that drew a few surprised smiles in the courtroom. "I'm sorry," she said, smiling faintly through the tension. "It's just, that was from 2007? The gallery chuckled softly with her. In that moment, the decades-old memory of young love pierced the somber mood, if only for an instant. Cassie's momentary laugh at her own, "who knew I'd fall so fast," remark reminded everyone that she was reminiscing about a much simpler time in her life. Things had changed since those early days. Estevao seized on the sentimentality of those messages. "You really fell for him quickly, didn't you?" the attorney asked. "Yes," Cassie admitted, "very quickly." She had believed in the sincerity of his affection back then. The defense attorney nodded, then made a point of complimenting Cassie directly. "Miss Ventura, you are very beautiful and charming," Estevao observed warmly. Cassie appeared momentarily taken aback by the praise from Combs' own lawyer, but managed a polite, "Thank you." Estevao offered a thin smile. "It's true," she added quietly. The courtroom sensed the calculated flattery in the air. By buttering up the witness, Estevao seemed to be trying to disarm Cassie, or at least put her at ease before the more uncomfortable questions began. It was an almost conversational tone, as if two old friends were chatting. This approach, some observers later noticed, was likely intentional. Estevao took the right tone, chipping away at the government's case without appearing too aggressive or turning off the jury. A former prosecutor watching the trial remarked of the defense's style. After establishing a polite rapport, Estevao deftly steered the cross-examination toward the salacious heart of the case, the secretive freak-offs that Ventura had described in horrifying detail on direct examination. These were the drug-fueled sex parties Combs allegedly orchestrated, coercing Cassie to participate with male sex workers while he watched and filmed. The prosecution had cast the freak-offs as the core of Combs' sex trafficking enterprise, episodes of degradation that Cassie hated enduring. Now the defense sought to recast them as encounters that Cassie not only consented to, but at times initiated and enjoyed. The tension in the courtroom climbed palpably as Estevao began unveiling explicit text messages to make this point. Courtroom sketch of defense attorney Ana Estevao, right, cross-examining Cassie Ventura Center, while Sean Diddy Combs left looks on. A monitor displays one of the many text messages being reviewed. Pop, pop, I really miss you. One by one, messages between Cassie and Combs were displayed for the jury, revealing snippets of their private life in stark detail. Many were lurid and deeply intimate, peppered with pet names and erotic banter. In one exchange from August 2009, the jurors saw Combs text Cassie about planning their next encounter. Estevao's voice remained even as she read Combs' line, "Friday it is. I wish we could get Jules here," referring to a man who sometimes participated. Cassie, as instructed, read her reply from the screen. "LOL, maybe we could, we don't know him that well though." Combs then wrote, "Wanna call him and feel him out?" And Cassie had answered, "Yeah, I can do that." The implication was clear. Cassie appeared actively involved in coordinating the next freak-off. Another message, dated just days later, elicited gasps from some in the gallery. It was Cassie's text to Combs declaring cheerfully, "I'm always ready to freak off." Estevao had Cassie read that line aloud for emphasis. Hearing those words in Cassie's own voice, and the same woman who yesterday tearfully described freak-offs as nightmarish ordeal, was jarring. Cassie flushed slightly but read her text verbatim. "I'm always ready for a freak-off," into the microphone. The defense attorney paced slowly, letting the jury absorb it. She then highlighted Combs' enthusiastic response from the same thread. On the monitor, Combs' reply appeared, "Want to know when you want the next one?" Cassie had answered with equal enthusiasm, writing back that it can take place whenever he wanted. 2 days later, she even sent Combs an extremely graphic message describing what she wanted to do during the encounter, to which he replied with eager anticipation. Cassie's follow-up text read, "Me too, I just wanted to be uncontrollable." When Cassie spoke the phrase uncontrollable aloud in court, her voice tightened almost imperceptibly. At counsel's table, Combs sat almost languidly, one arm draped over the back of his chair as these intimate dispatches were recited. According to courtroom observers, he appeared relaxed, even satisfied, as if this parade of steamy messages proved a point in his favor. More than once, he glanced up at the judge's bench or out toward the press section, his expression calm. During a brief lull, Combs caught the eye of a cluster of reporters and offered a polite nod and a greeting. "How you doing?" he mouthed, flashing a quick smile. It was a surreal moment, the defendant acknowledging onlookers in the midst of his accuser reading X-rated texts. Perhaps it was his way of signaling confidence that things were going his way. Back on the stand, Cassie maintained her composure as best she could, while her private words were laid bare. But under the surface, turmoil brewed. After 15 more minutes of this recitation of sexual text, she paused, her eyes welling with tears she refused to let fall. "Your Honor," Cassie said, turning to Judge Aaron Subramanian. "May I have a short break, please?" The request was plaintive. The judge, who had been watching this emotional tightrope walk intently, immediately granted a recess. Cassie exhaled shakily and stepped down from the stand. As the jury filed out for the break, she avoided looking in Combs' direction. Instead, she focused on her husband, Alex Fine, who sat in the first row of spectators along with a cluster of her close supporters. Alex gave her a small, encouraging nod as she passed, and Cassie managed a tight smile in return. It was evident that reading those explicit messages aloud, describing acts she earlier testified she hated doing, was an agonizing task. During the recess, a low buzz of chatter broke out in the courtroom. At the defense table, Combs stood up to confer with his attorneys, gesturing calmly with a pen and a stack of post-it notes in hand. On the prosecution side, Assistant U.S. Attorney Dan Gittner looked on with a frown, perhaps strategizing about how to rehabilitate his witness later on redirect. Judge Subramanian had a brief sidebar with both sets of lawyers in hushed tones. His Honor had already made it clear earlier that morning that he did not want this cross-examination dragging on indefinitely, mindful not only of the court's schedule but also of Cassie's advanced pregnancy. "Let's keep it moving, counsel." The judge had gently scolded Estevao at one point when questioning drifted into minutia, reminding everyone that Ventura needed to be off the stand by the weekend, in part because prosecutors worried she could literally go into labor if the trial got delayed. After 10 minutes, court reconvened. Cassie returned to the stand, shoulders squared. She took a sip of water, steeling herself. Estevao resumed the cross-examination with renewed focus. More messages from later in the relationship were introduced. In one from 2017, as the couple's volatile relationship neared its end, Cassie had texted Combs that she was too excited to see him at the next freak-off. Estevao emphasized this to the jury. Even toward the end, Ventura was expressing anticipation for these encounters. But the defense attorney did not dwell solely on Cassie's sexual enthusiasm. She also displayed a different kind of message Cassie sent around that same period. It was dated December 8th, 2009, and the tone was very different. "It felt right before, but now it makes me feel a little dirty and grimy as opposed to sensual and spontaneous," Cassie had written about the freak-offs. On the stand, Cassie read those words, her own words, haltingly. They clearly captured her conflicted mindset. At one time, she convinced herself these multi-day parties were sensual adventures done out of love, but eventually they left her feeling defiled. In the message, she lamented to Combs that she was worried she had become nothing more than the vehicle for his fantasies. "I need more than just sex from you," she had pleaded. "You see, even back then you were of two minds about these encounters," Estevao commented, tilting her head as she regarded Cassie. "You go back and forth. Sometimes you're eager, other times you admit you felt dirty doing it." Cassie nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, voice subdued. The defense attorney seized on this. "You even worried he was only using you for sex, that you might just be a, what did you call it, the girlfriend who fulfilled his fantasies and nothing more," Estevao continued, paraphrasing Cassie's own text. Cassie sighed and agreed that, yes, at times she did fear that. Estevao let that point linger. It demonstrated that Cassie's feelings about the freak-offs were ambivalent and complex, not simply one-sided victimization. To the defense, this suggested that Cassie's testimony of being coerced could be undermined by her own mixed feelings at the time. Cassie had loved Combs desperately and wanted to please him, even if it meant engaging in acts that made her hate herself later. At one juncture, Cassie grew visibly frustrated with how the defense was cherry-picking excerpts of their communications. After reading a particularly graphic snippet out of context, Cassie interjected unprompted, "There's a lot we skipped over, right?" she said pointedly, glancing from Estevao to the jury. A flicker of impatience crossed Judge Subramanian's face. He had not invited Cassie to elaborate beyond the question. Estevao raised an eyebrow but maintained her pleasant demeanor. "Just answer the question, Ms. Ventura," the judge gently reminded her. Cassie pressed her lips together and fell back into a polite compliance, but her brief protest hung in the air. The jurors aren't hearing the full story. It was one of the only times during cross that Cassie's composure slipped to reveal a flash of defiance. Shifting tactics, Estevao next turned to the heavy drug use that permeated Combs and Ventura's years together. She suggested to the jury that the chaos and violence in their relationship might be explained by intoxication and addiction rather than by a calculated trafficking enterprise. Under Estevao's questioning, Cassie acknowledged that by 2008 to 2009, the two of them were indeed get-high partners, as they sometimes jokingly called themselves. "Didn't you refer to yourselves as that? Get-high partners?" Estevao asked. Cassie managed a faint, rueful smile. "We did," she admitted. They often took drugs together: cocaine, ecstasy, MDMA, and ketamine, you name it. Cassie had tried everything, she said matter-of-factly. Both of them spiraled into addiction during those years. Cassie even agreed that Combs wasn't happy about her growing opiate habit, hypocritical as that felt to her, and that he had told her to stop doing drugs with her friends and only do them with him. Estevao latched onto that point to cast Combs in a somewhat concerned light. "Mr. Combs actually tried to curtail your drug use at one point, didn't he?" she asked. "In Los Angeles, he instructed drug dealers not to sell to you as part of trying to get you help. Do you recall that?" Cassie frowned slightly. "He did do that at some point," she acknowledged, "though I'm not sure if it was in 2016. "And why did he do it?" Estevao pressed. Cassie's eyes narrowed. She knew what the defense was implying. "He suggested I get treatment," as Cassie answered carefully. "He only wanted you to get high with him, not with your friends. He was upset when you did drugs without him, correct?" Estevao posited, echoing an earlier statement Cassie had made. Cassie exhaled. "Yes. If I used without him, knowing his reaction was explosive," she said, choosing her words deliberately. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone. Combs wasn't trying to help out of altruism. He wanted to control her drug use, like everything else, to own that part of her too. Still, Estevao suggested an alternate spin. He told those dealers to stop delivering to you, maybe because he cared and didn't want you harming yourself. Isn't that possible? She floated. Cassie gave a slight shrug. "He didn't want me doing drugs unless it was with him," she reiterated bluntly. On redirect later, the prosecution would no doubt emphasize that this was about control, not caring. But on cross, Estevao managed to leave the jury with the idea that hard drugs and addiction fueled the mayhem in Combs and Ventura's life together, potentially muddling who was responsible for what. If Combs was frequently too inebriated or strung out to even recall his violent outbursts, as Cassie had testified, could the jury really view him as the cold mastermind of a premeditated sex trafficking conspiracy? The defense wanted them to wonder exactly that. From drugs, the cross-exam flowed into the topic of jealousy and infidelity, another fraught aspect of the Combs-Ventura saga that the defense believed worked in their favor. Estevao reminded the courtroom that Combs was not the only one who strayed or felt possessive. Cassie had her own jealous moments and secret dalliances, and exploring those could both undermine her moral high ground and paint Combs' more extreme reactions as those of a spurned lover rather than a criminal pimp. "Ms. Ventura, you admitted yesterday that you would get insanely jealous seeing Mr. Combs with other women, correct?" Estevao asked. Cassie nodded. "Yes, I did at times," she said quietly. Indeed, Cassie had testified that Combs carried on multiple relationships with other women during their decade together, something that caused huge fights between them. On the stand now, Cassie even conceded that by 2013, she still thought she was Combs' main girl and would feel insulted if he treated her like a mere side piece or flaunted other girlfriends. A text she'd sent him that year appeared on the screen. "You're making me look like a side piece, and that's not what I thought I was," she had written angrily. Cassie acknowledged sending that message, explaining she truly believed she was his primary partner at the time. The jury could see in those words a portrait of a young woman fiercely vying for her boyfriend's attention, not a helpless captive as the prosecution portrayed. Estevao didn't stop there. She brought up one name that caused Cassie to visibly stiffen in her seat: Kim Porter. Porter was Combs' longtime on and off partner, the mother of 3 of his children, and a constant presence in his life, even while he was with Cassie. "You were jealous when Sean spent holidays with Miss Porter and their children without you, correct?" the attorney asked. Cassie pursed her lips. "I was very upset about that," she admitted, recalling how Combs had assured her his romance with Porter was over, even as he continued what Cassie felt was playing house with Porter for the sake of the kids. Porter tragically died in 2018, and in public Combs had since referred to her as the love of his life. That painful fact hung unspoken in the courtroom air. Cassie's gaze dropped to her hands. Yes, she had struggled with intense insecurity over Porter, she confirmed. Combs wouldn't fully cut ties with Porter for her, and it tormented Cassie. By raising Porter, the defense subtly underscored how complicated the dynamics were. Cassie was not a wholly virtuous victim, but rather one player in a messy love triangle susceptible to envy and bitterness herself. To further drive home the symmetry, Estevao also highlighted Cassie's own infidelity. She inquired about Cassie's brief relationship with a famous rapper-actor in 2015. Now, Estevao approached it from a different angle. "Mr. Combs actually introduced you to hoping to help your music career, did he not?" she asked. "Yes," Cassie answered cautiously. "And you began an intimate relationship with Mr. Cudi while you and Mr. Combs were on a break, but you were still involved in freak-offs with Mr. Combs at that time, right?" Cassie swallowed hard. "We were on a break, but yes, I did still see Mr. Combs occasionally then," she said, choosing her words. In fact, Cassie admitted she went so far as to purchase a secret burner phone because she was afraid of what Combs might do if he found out she was dating another man. "I felt it would be too dangerous to tell him," she said in a low voice. Members of the jury exchanged glances at that statement. Even in the defense's telling, Cassie's fear of Combs' jealousy sounded very real. Estevao didn't dwell on the menace implicit there. Instead, she emphasized Cassie's choices. Cassie had chosen to cheat, however justified she may have felt, and Combs had reason to be angry. "You hid it from him because you knew he'd be upset, just as you would be upset when he was with someone else. There was jealousy on both sides, wasn't there?" Estevao summarized. "Yes, on both sides," Cassie agreed softly. In a poignant aside, she added, "When he was jealous, it was a little scary." The defense attorney let that comment lie. She did not press further on how scary Combs could get. No need to invite more detail on that. The jurors had already heard plenty about his violent rages. Instead, Estevao pivoted again, continuing her tour through the greatest hits of Cassie's complicated love life. She even brought up the Hollywood star Cassie dated after finally leaving Combs, actor Michael B. Jordan. This elicited a murmur in the courtroom, another bold-faced name tossed into the mix. Cassie testified that in 2015, fed up upon learning Combs was still seeing yet another woman, she started seeing Jordan while working on a film. When Cassie decided to end things with Combs for good, she did it in dramatic fashion. She sent a video of Combs with one of his other women to him and to members of his staff, essentially publicly shaming him. Everybody was lying, Cassie explained, of why she blasted the video out. She felt all of Combs' entourage had covered up his cheating and she wanted to expose the truth. Estevao highlighted this episode to suggest Cassie could be vindictive when hurt. The implication was that her cooperation with prosecutors now might stem, at least in part, from a desire for revenge or vindication from those years of betrayal. Cassie admitted that after she circulated that incriminating video, her decade-long entanglement with Combs finally ruptured. They split in late 2015, though, as the jury knew, the worst was yet to come with the alleged in 2018 after they'd broken up, an event still firmly denied by Combs. Throughout this intense cross-examination, Cassie maintained a remarkable poise. Those in the courtroom were struck by how calm and composed she remained, even when revisiting the most degrading moments of her life with Combs. She did not raise her voice or falter in answering Estevao's multi-pronged attacks. When confronted with her own contradictory messages, Cassie didn't try to deny them or make excuses. She agreed openly to many propositions. Yes, she truly loved him. Yes, she consented to things. Yes, she stayed far too long. That frankness lent her a quiet credibility, even as the defense scored points with her words. Observers noted that Ventura had already cried through parts of her direct testimony earlier in the week, but on this third day on the stand, she appeared steadfast and matter-of-fact. If anything, Estevao's mild, almost friendly style of questioning seemed to allow Cassie to relax and respond without defensiveness. At times, the two women's exchanges were so polite and conversational that it was easy to forget one was interrogating the other. From the jury's perspective, Cassie came off as a woman acknowledging her complicated past rather than a witness caught in lies. She didn't break under pressure. There were no angry outbursts or dramatic meltdowns. Even when Estevao's questions grew pointed, Cassie's answers remained steady, occasionally tinged with sadness or resignation. An example of her composure came when Estevao tried to corner her into admitting she wanted group sex. "You told him you wanted to do freak-offs, didn't you?" the attorney asked bluntly. Cassie straightened in her chair and answered firmly, "No, there's a lot more to that," refusing to let the narrative be oversimplified. Her tone was respectful but resolute. Judge Subramanian watched these interactions carefully. More than once, he glanced from the witness to the defense table to gauge if Esteval's gentle approach was straying into too friendly a territory, the fine line between an effective cross and an improper coaching. But Esteval stayed within bounds, and the judge largely let the exchange flow. The jurors, for their part, were visibly engaged. Several jurors leaned in with arms crossed or brows furrowed as explicit texts and emails flashed on their screens. When especially graphic language was read, one female juror shook her head in disbelief, while a male juror pressed his thumb to his chin, staring intently at the monitor. A few took notes rapidly whenever Cassie clarified a timeline or admitted a key detail. By midday, this panel had been steeped in the twisted intimacy of the Combs-Ventura relationship for 3 days straight, and one could only imagine what they made of it all. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in Courtroom 21B oscillated between high drama and tedious document review. At times, it felt more like a therapy session than a trial, with Cassie reflecting on the cycle of abuse she endured, only for Esteval to swiftly remind everyone that Cassie had also found genuine highs, both literal and figurative, in that relationship. "He's a charismatic, big personality that everyone really loved," Cassie acknowledged of Combs during one such exchange. She admitted she had been drawn to that charisma, right? "When you really care about someone and you're in love, you don't want to disappoint them," she said, explaining why she often went along with Combs' wishes. Indeed, not wanting to disappoint him had kept her coming back time and again. Esteval nodded as if she understood. This line of testimony actually dovetailed with the prosecution's theme of coercive control, yet the defense repurposed it to show the emotional hold Combs had on Cassie rather than an illegal one. It was a toxic love, the defense implied, but love nonetheless. In a telling moment toward the end of the day, Esteval posed a question that almost sounded compassionate. Lowering her voice, she asked Cassie, "What made you fall in love with him in the first place?" Cassie appeared momentarily taken aback by the personal nature of it. She took a breath. "In the beginning, it happened very fast," she answered. "The more time I spent with him and got to know him, the more what I thought was his real personality came out, and I liked who he was." She managed a faint smile at the memory of those early days when Combs was sweet, attentive to her. For a brief second, the courtroom glimpsed the couple they once were, a music mogul and his young protege in the throes of new romance. It was a stark contrast to the grim tales of violence and debauchery that had since come to light. Throughout the session, Combs' family members watched intently from the gallery. His mother, Janice, and several of his children had been present every day, a united front of support. On this day, Combs' 3 adult daughters were notably absent, perhaps deliberately kept away given the sexually explicit content being discussed. But his sons were there, sitting somberly behind their father, and they exchanged whispers with their grandmother during breaks. Cassie's side of the gallery was also occupied by loved ones, her husband Alex Fine, as well as a few friends and associates who had come to lend moral support. At one point during a pause in testimony, Cassie locked eyes with Alex and gave a small grateful nod. He smiled back reassuringly. The unspoken message was clear: "You're doing great. Hang in there." Cassie squared her shoulders again and faced forward, resolve renewed. Also in attendance were various media figures and even some social media personalities who had been drawn to this high-profile trial. The case had attracted an unusual assortment of onlookers, including YouTube streamers and TikTok commentators who stood in line for the public seating. During recesses, these self-styled trial commentators could be seen rushing outside the courthouse to record their hot takes on the testimony, phones mounted on little tripods as they passionately recapped the salacious details for online audiences. The judge had already admonished and ejected a few disruptive spectators earlier in the week when decorum was breached in the overflow rooms. The circus-like environment outside, with some Combs supporters blaring his music and shouting "Free Diddy" on the streets, felt worlds away from the sober, wood-paneled courtroom where Cassie Ventura's fatefully intertwined past with Sean Combs was being dissected word by word. Inside, despite the defense's gentle approach, there were subtle moments of confrontation. One came when Estevao brought up an infamous violent incident that had come out in Cassie's earlier testimony. The night Combs allegedly dangled one of Cassie's friends over a 17th floor balcony in a fit of rage. On direct exam, Cassie had recounted that terrifying episode in Los Angeles, how Combs grabbed her friend, known as Banna, and hung her over the railing, threatening her life. Now Estevao probed Cassie's recollection. "You didn't actually see how that started, did you?" she asked. "Didn't you learn about what happened on that balcony after the fact?" Cassie straightened. "I saw what I saw," she insisted firmly. She explained that while she hadn't witnessed the initial moments, she was in another room when the scuffle began. She did come out in time to see Combs physically hanging her friend over the ledge before pulling her back and tossing her onto patio furniture. Cassie's voice hardened as she described the scene. Even under the defense's questioning, her account did not waver. It happened, she saw it, period. Estevao pressed no further on the balcony incident. The imagery of it was likely best left minimized from the defense perspective. Another point of contention was the so-called wooden hanger incident. Cassie had claimed that years ago, Combs violently threw a heavy wooden clothes hanger at one of her female friends after discovering Cassie had hidden a new boyfriend from him. The projectile allegedly hit the friend and ended that friendship. Estevao challenged Cassie on this story as well. "Isn't it true you never actually saw Mr. Combs throw a hanger at her?" the attorney asked pointedly. Cassie admitted that was technically true. She had been in the bathroom when she heard screaming and came out to find her friend injured. "I don't think I ever said I saw," as Cassie clarified on the stand. "When I came out, she was hurt and extremely upset. I pieced together what happened." Cassie added that the friend later made a legal demand for compensation, which Cassie paid, feeling responsible, and then cut off contact with Cassie entirely. Estevao's implication was that Cassie might have exaggerated or assumed Combs did something he hadn't directly in her view. But Cassie stuck to her belief. "He was the only one there. I heard the scream and the impact," she maintained quietly. Again, the defense let it drop. The goal wasn't necessarily to convince jurors these acts didn't happen, but to sow just a bit of doubt or demonstrate that Cassie's knowledge wasn't firsthand in every instance of alleged violence. As 5 p.m. neared, Estevao began winding down the day's interrogation. She shifted back to a bigger picture mode, highlighting once more how complicated and non-criminal this relationship was in her view. She listed a few final concessions from Cassie about the mutual benefits of her time with Combs. For instance, Estevao asked Cassie to acknowledge that Combs had advanced her career early on, hosting her lavish 21st birthday party where stars like Britney Spears attended at Combs' invitation, getting her record deals featuring her in his music ventures. Cassie agreed that he had opened some doors for her in the entertainment industry, though only her first album materialized and her music career stalled soon after. The defense also noted that Cassie lived a life of luxury with Combs, trips on private jets, expensive gifts, a level of fame by association. One email shown to the jury had Cassie telling Combs, "I don't need your money, I need some attention. I can pay for these things myself," indicating she chose his attention over material support. "You were a celebrity in your own right during those years, were you not?" Estevao asked. "Yes, I had some success," Cassie replied modestly. The subtext the defense floated was that Cassie wasn't a captive with no agency. She got something out of the relationship too. The two of them, while locked in a toxic dance, each benefited in certain ways until it all went horribly sour. By the close of day 4, Cassie Ventura had weathered roughly 7 hours of cross-examination. She stepped down from the stand that evening looking understandably drained, but she had held up under the pressure. As court adjourned, a court sketch artist captured Cassie slumping slightly in relief as the judge announced the break, one hand on her belly as if to steady herself. In the sketch, Estevao is shown at the podium mid-question, and Combs in the foreground appears impassive, a snapshot of the day's tense dynamic. Combs himself stood and buttoned his suit jacket, exchanging a few words with his lawyers and flashing a quick smile toward his family in the gallery before marshals let him out. Cassie lingered a moment, receiving a gentle hug from Alex Fine and a supportive rub on the shoulder from one of her attorneys. She closed her eyes for a second, exhaling deeply. It was over, at least for today. There would be more cross-examination the next morning, but Ventura had survived this gauntlet of a day with her core testimony intact. Aftermath, legal, and public reactions. Outside the courthouse, the media scrum was buzzing by the time proceedings wrapped. Cameramen and reporters who had been camped on Worth Street all week sprang into action, shouting questions into the warm evening air. Cassie, how do you feel about today's testimony? Johnny, what do you think of the cross-exam so far? Security officers kept the press at bay as the trial participants exited. Cassie's team whisked her to a waiting SUV with minimal fanfare. Combs, flanked by bodyguards, strode past a mix of cheering supporters and jeering onlookers. A group of die-hard fans blared "Bad Boy for Life" from a car stereo, chanting "Free Diddy" as he passed. Simultaneously, a smaller knot of women on the corner held up signs reading "We stand with Cassie in solidarity." The split screen of public sentiment was evident, and this trial has sharply divided opinions in the court of public opinion. But that night, clips and analysis of Cassie's cross-examination dominated news headlines and social media feeds. On CNN and other networks, legal pundits parsed the day's developments with avid interest. Legal analysts generally agreed that the defense had done an effective job in undermining the prosecution's narrative, at least on the surface. It may have seemed tedious to slog through years of their text messages, but it was an effective way for the defense to get Diddy's narrative in through Cassie's own words, observed Sarah Krisoff, a former federal prosecutor. By methodically presenting Cassie's loving and explicit messages, Estevao has shown the jury that Ventura willingly participated in the wild sexual lifestyle, which bolsters the defense argument that while Combs may have behaved poorly or even abusively at times, he was not running a criminal sex ring. They're trying to show jurors it was a toxic, violent, complicated relationship, but not racketeering or trafficking, Krisoff explained, concisely summarizing the defense's aim. Another commentator, trial lawyer Terry Austin, concurred that Estevao scored points by portraying Cassie as being in control and benefiting from the arrangement with Combs. The defense did a good job arguing that Cassie consented and even profited from aspects of the relationship, Austin noted, pointing to evidence that Cassie often said yes to the freak-offs and enjoyed the perks of Combs' lavish lifestyle. However, not everyone saw the day as a win for the defense. Some cultural observers and advocates for abuse survivors cautioned against viewing Cassie as a hypocrite simply because she had mixed feelings and moments of consent. Trauma bonding is complicated. Victims can love their abusers and even appear to participate, but it doesn't erase the power imbalance. One women's rights advocate commented on a cable news panel, emphasizing that Cassie's emotional attachment did not negate her testimony of coercion. Indeed, on redirect examination expected Friday, prosecutors would have the chance to contextualize those cherry-picked messages and reinforce Cassie's core allegations that Combs groomed her from a young age, controlled every aspect of her life, and leveraged her love and addictions to trap her in a cycle of exploitation. Legal experts predicted that the prosecution would use Cassie's very honesty to their advantage. She didn't crumble on cross, she held firm and actually acknowledged the gray areas, noted a former judge on CNN's Evening Legal Roundup. Ironically, that candor can make her more credible to a jury. Real life isn't black and white. The defense showed the messy truth, but Cassie owned it. In the end, her central story of being harmed and uncontrolled still stands. In the court of public opinion, reactions were equally nuanced. On social media, hashtags like "Number I Stand with Cassie" and "Number Team Diddy" dueled for dominance. Many fans praised Cassie's bravery and composure, marveling at how she endured hours of invasive questioning without losing her cool. "That woman is strong as steel," one Twitter user wrote. "Imagine reading your private text out loud to a courtroom and still staying focused on why you're there. I stand with Cassie." Others, however, seized on the defense's narrative to cast doubt on Cassie's motives. Skeptics highlighted her $20 million civil settlement from Combs, paid after she filed a lawsuit in 2023, and suggested she might be embellishing for money or revenge. Cassie's no saint. She was with him for clout and dollars and only cracked foul later, an influencer argued in a viral TikTok, echoing the defense's portrait of a complex, consenting relationship rather than a victim-perpetrator dynamic. The truth, as some cultural commentators pointed out, could lie somewhere in between. Cassie did love him and gained from being with him, and she was subjected to horrific abuse. The two realities were not mutually exclusive in the context of an abusive relationship. Even veteran legal observers marveled at the emotional tightrope this trial was walking. It was rare, they noted, to see a high-profile accuser readily admit to love, jealousy, and participation in the very acts at issue. She basically acknowledged the defense's best facts, but then again, she was credible in doing so, one law professor remarked on NPR. If the jury believed that Cassie was telling the truth about everything, the good and the bad, they might very well conclude that her more disturbing allegations, rape, blackmail threats, were true as well, regardless of her compliance at other times. The jury's task would be to parse a decade-long relationship that defied simple labels. As day 4 ended, the general consensus was that the cross-examination had been intense but not decisively damaging to Ventura. Cassie walked out of court with her head held high, having answered every question put to her. There were no major gotcha moments, no outright impeachments of her testimony, though the defense succeeded in highlighting inconsistencies and the consensual aspects of their relationship. The prosecution, meanwhile, signaled that on redirect, they would address any misimpressions. We have no further comment today. Assistant U.S. Attorney Gittner told reporters with a slight smile, "We'll let Ms. Ventura's testimony speak for itself, and it's not finished yet." One thing was clear, this trial was far from over. The day's dramatic duel in words had only deepened the public's fascination. By nightfall, major media outlets from CNN to the BBC were airing clips of Cassie's testimony and expert analyses of the legal strategies unfolding. The cultural impact of the case was also becoming a talking point. A powerful music mogul facing accountings of alleged abuse in the Me Too era, a woman of color boldly speaking out against someone of Combs' stature, the broader questions about exploitation in the entertainment industry. In think pieces and op-eds, writers debated what this meant for the music world's reckoning with its dark side. Cassie Ventura's story, once relegated to whispers in industry circles, was now being validated in a court of law for all to hear. As court observers filed their reports that evening, the prevailing feeling was one of anticipation, revealing the mind games, manipulation, and genuine affection intertwined in Combs and Ventura's long relationship. It ended without a knockout blow to either side. The defense had made its points, yet Cassie remained unbowed. The stage was now set for the next chapter, day 5, when cross-examination would conclude and prosecutors would have a final chance to rehabilitate Cassie's account. The world would be watching to see how this legal thriller unfolds, but one thing was certain. On day 4, Cassie Ventura stared down the defense's fire with quiet strength, never losing sight of her truth.